This is Water in the Plan, Take 2. If you remember a few weeks ago, we had Water in the Plan, Marshall Keeble. We got to be introduced to Marshall Keeble. This is Take 2. There was a lot of information about that message that I wanted to share or get across. And given the opportunity to stand again, I decided to try to make that happen. Water has been in the plan in the scriptures from the very beginning. We got Genesis 1, verses 1 and 2. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. And the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. From the very beginning, water and the Spirit was one. It was together. It was in the story, the creation. Genesis 1 gives us the understanding that the water and the Spirit are to begin the process that we understand to be creation. Now, we'll go to Mark chapter 1. Listen in verse 9. In those days Jesus came from Nazareth into Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. Immediately coming up out of the water, he saw the heavens opening and the Spirit like a dove descending on him. Now, this is the first time I had ever recognized, maybe you, maybe not. In verse 10, immediately coming up out of the water, he saw the heavens opening and the spirit of dove descending upon him. Verse 11, and a voice came out of the heavens, you are my beloved Son, and in you I am well pleased. I had always placed that as a group happening. Everybody saw the dove and descending on it. It doesn't say that here, does it? Immediately coming up out of the water, he saw the heavens opening. Jesus saw, and the Spirit descending upon him. And the voice said, and God says to Jesus, you, and in you I am well pleased. So it was kind of singled out. But the point of it is water and the Spirit, again, is presence, you see. You see that? In Genesis 1 and 2, we saw the waters, formless and void, and then we saw the Spirit hovering over, and that we knew that creation was going to begin. That was the beginning of all things. And here we see again, we've got the Spirit and the water, and we know from our understanding of Scriptures that we have the Spirit, the creation, the new covenant, right? This is the beginning again, isn't it? You see how that is? Water's in the plan. Water's in the plan from the very beginning. We're going to start with Noah. We shared that last time, Genesis chapter 6. The world is corrupt. Now it came about when men began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, and the sons of God saw the daughters of men were beautiful. And they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. The Lord said, my spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he is also flesh, nevertheless his days shall be numbered. Let's go to verse 8. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. God saw that man's deeds and man's thoughts were evil continually. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Verse 22 of chapter 6, thus Noah did according to all God had commanded him, so he did. 7 verse 5, Noah did according to all that the Lord had commanded him. Noah and his sons and his sons' daughters or wives and his wife were put on the ark. We know this story, so we won't dive it real well. For they've got anywhere from 20 years to 120 years. Noah built this boat. We understand that Noah would have tried to share the scriptures, the gospel fact that there's a flood coming, the gospel fact that the good news is there's an opportunity to be saved on this ark. We're going to call that the good news. But nobody came. And Noah and his family were put on the boat for 7 days. They were on the boat, and then God shut the boat, the ark. That's the first time that we have the waters, and we understand that after 7 days the waters came and flooded the earth. And they flooded the earth because everything on the earth was so corrupt and so evil within the heart that nothing could live. No air within nostrils could survive this flood. This flood was the water within the plan. This flood was the weakest of all water in the Scriptures. It only saved 8 people. Now we see this, Peter talks about baptism now corresponds to this, now relates to this. The opportunity to save Noah was dividing Noah, separating Noah from the sin. You see what the water did there? In Genesis 6, 7, and 8, the earth was flooded. Everything on the earth was gone, done. God knew that within their heart all evil persisted. And God separated Noah from this sin. Here we have 8 people saved, but we don't have what we understand as Christians the same. It's going to build in Exodus 14, starting in verse 1. Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, tell the sons of Israel to turn back to the camp before Pharaoh. So, Exodus chapter 14, Moses has got the Israelites at the Jordan, at the Red Sea, and Moses is in trouble as far as they're concerned. The Israelites have turned back and said, "Is this not what we told you back in Egypt? Should you have not let us die there?" Moses said to the people, verse 13, "Do not fear. Stand by and see the salvation of the Lord, which we will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you have seen today, you will never see them again forever. The Lord will fight for you while you keep silent." Moses here says, interesting, I like the way, do not fear, stand by. Stand by, stand still. Verse 14, the Lord will fight for you while you keep silent. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the sons of Israel to go forward. As for you, to lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it. And the sons of Israel shall go through the midst of the sea on dry land. As for me, behold, I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians." Here we have another opportunity of water in the Scriptures. When Moses and the Israelites got to the water separated them from where they needed to be, and it kept them in fear of the oncoming Egyptians. Moses is told here to hold up his staff over the water divide. We have 8 people saved by Noah. We're coming in here. The Israelites are able to go through on dry land once the waters are separated. It's been escalated. Israelites are saved. God's people are saved. They're separated from the Egyptians. Verse 21, then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord swept the sea back by a strong east wind all night, and turned the sea into dry land, so that the waters were divided. The sons of Israel went through in the midst of the sea on the dry land, and the waters were like a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. Then the Egyptians took up the pursuit, and all the Pharaoh's horses, his chariots and horsemen went in after them in the midst of the sea. Water saved the Israelites because water separated the Egyptians from the Israelites. Water's in the plan. Water was in the plan because the water had to be divided. Israelites had to go through. The Egyptians didn't make it. God used the water to separate the Israelites from the sin of the Egyptians. We're going to find in Joshua chapter 3. Joshua chapter 3. starting in verse 14. So when the people set out from their tents to cross the Jordan, with the priest carrying the ark of the covenant before the people, and when those who carried the ark came into the Jordan, and the feet of the priest carrying the ark were dipped into the edge of the water, for the Jordan overflows all its banks all the days of the harvest. The waters which were flowing down from above stood and rose up in one heap, a great distance away at Adam, the city that is beside Zarethan. And those which were flowing down toward the sea of the Arabah, the salt sea, were completely cut off. So the people crossed opposite Jericho, and the priest who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan, while all Israel crossed on dry ground until all the nation had finished crossing the Jordan. Water was in the plan. Joshua here is leading the Israelites to the promised land. The difference here, Noah was separated from sin. The water separated Noah from sin. Moses and the Red Sea, the water had separated Moses and the Israelites from the evil that was pursuing them. But here we've escalated to the point to where the water needed contact. The priest had to carry the ark into the water and stand. The waters were overflowed the banks. It was the flood season. Because of the harvest, the water was swift. And this time, to cross the water led them to the promised land. The escalation in the Scriptures with the waters in the plan, we have seen it continue to grow. And next we're going to see Jonah. Jonah in chapter 1. Jonah, we remember the story, and we should remember the story well, about the big fish, Jonah and the big fish. Jonah chapter 1, the word of the Lord came to Jonah the son of the Ammonite, saying, Arise and go to Nineveh, the great city, and cry against it, for their wickedness has come up before me. But Jonah rose up to flee Tarshish from the presence of the Lord, so he went down to Joppa, found a ship that was going to Tarshish, passed the fair, and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. Jonah's being a man of God, that he's running. He's fleeing the demand. And we remember that the demand was to go the Lord hurled a great wind on the sea, and there was a great storm on the sea, verse 4, so that the ship was about to break up. Then the sailors became afraid, and every man cried to his God. And they threw the cargo which was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. But Jonah had gone below into the hold of the ship, lain down and fallen sound asleep. So the captain approached him and said, How is it that you're sleeping? Get up, call on your God. Perhaps your God will be concerned about us so that we will not perish. The water here is definitely within the plan, but it steps up a notch on this. Each man, verse 7, said to his mate, Come, let us cast lots so that we may learn on whose account this calamity has struck us. So they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. Then they said to him, Tell us now, on whose account has this calamity struck us? What is your occupation? Where do you come from? What is your country? What people are you? He said to them, I'm a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord of God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. The escalation here is the offering that's about to take place. Verse 10, Then the men became extremely frightened, and they said to him, How could you do this? For the men knew that he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord, because he had told them. So they said to him, What should we do to you that the sea may become calm for us? They asked the question, he gives them the answer. He said to them, Pick me up and throw me into the sea. Then the sea will become calm for you, for I know that on account of me this great storm has come upon you. Verse 13, However, the men rowed desperately to return to land, but they could not, for the sea was becoming even stormier than against them. They asked him what to do. He said, Ship me, throw me overboard. That answer wasn't sufficient. That wasn't the answer that they wanted to hear, and we'll find out why here in a second. They rowed desperately. Verse 14, when they called on the Lord and said, "We earnestly pray, O Lord, do not let us perish on account of this man's life, and do not put innocent blood on us for you. O Lord, have done as you pleased." They saw that throwing Jonah overboard was death. And they feared that throwing Jonah overboard, his blood, his death was going to be on their hands. 8 people were saved, separated from sin, from evil through the ark and Noah. The Israelite nation was saved from the evil of the Egyptians by crossing the Red Sea. Joshua was able to lead the Israelites to the promised land. Here, the water involved is now stepped up to where it's going to claim the life of a man of God. At least as far as the people on the ship are concerned. Verse 15, so they picked up Jonah, threw him into the sea, and the sea stopped its raging. Then the men feared the Lord greatly, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows, and the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow Jonah. The waters ceased. The sea stopped its raging when this man went overboard. Now, this big fish wasn't waiting for Jonah. This big fish wasn't swimming by about the time that he got cast overboard, and it leaped and grabbed and off it went. Listen to Jonah's prayer. Then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the stomach of the fish, and he said, "I called out of my distress to the Lord, and he answered me. I cried for help from the depth of Sheol. You heard my voice. For you had cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas, and the current engulfed me, and your breakers and billows passed over me. So I said, I have expelled from your sight. Nevertheless, I will look again towards your holy temple." Jonah is repenting here. Do you see it? Towards your holy temple. Verse 5, water encompasses me to the point of death. The great deep engulfed me. Weeds are wrapped around my head. I descended to the roots of the mountains. The earth with its bars was around me forever. But you have brought up my life from the pit, O Lord my God. While I was fainting away, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came to you into your holy temple. Those who regard vain idols forsake, but I will sacrifice to you. Jonah has repented. Isn't it interesting where Jonah had to get? There's water in the plan, but Jonah had to get to the point to where the sea had engulfed him to the point of death. But then the big fish. Then the Lord commanded the fish and vomited Jonah up onto the dry land. Jonah for 3 days was in the belly of this fish. Jonah was a man of God that was seen as to have died. A man of God had to lose his life to calm the seas as far as those on the ship were concerned. For 3 days he was in the belly of this fish. And now he's up to preach to Nineveh, and we remember what the story to Nineveh is. Nineveh repents. They hear of the God that's going to do away with them, and they put sackcloth on the animals, and they repent. And of course Jonah knew what was coming. Nineveh repents, and God doesn't punish them, and then Jonah's upset. But the man of God, the escalation from the very beginning, Genesis chapter 2, God's been covering us and taking care of us through death from the very beginning. Genesis chapter 2, when Adam and Eve were naked and they had put fig leaves over them, God took skins and He covered them. He made coverings for them. From the very beginning, God was having to cover and take care through death. Here we have got now a man of God has lost his life, according to the people on the ship are concerned, to save and to pass through. Romans chapter 6. The escalation, what Frank read for us. If one is not born of water and the Spirit. Romans chapter 6. What shall we say then? Are we to continue in sin that grace may increase? May it never be. How shall we who died to sin still live in it? Or do you not know that all of us who have been baptized into Christ have been baptized into his death? Therefore we have been buried with him through baptism into death, so that as Christ was raised from the dead through the glory of the Father, so we too might walk in the newness of life. For if we become united with him in the likeness of his death, certainly we shall also be in the likeness of his resurrection. Knowing this, that our old self was crucified with him in order that our body of sin might be done away with, so that we would no longer be slaves to sin. For he who has died is free from sin. Verse 6, or chapter 6 of Romans, and verse 4, therefore we have been buried with him through baptism into death, so that, as Christ was raised from the dead through the glory of the Father, so we too might walk in newness of life. We understand that the Old Testament scriptures had death of sin offerings. Once a year we would come and we would shed the blood on the altar for the forgiveness of sin in the Old Testament. And nothing was pure enough to be had, and they had to do it every year and every year and every year. And in the Old Testament, Jesus himself was put on, like Moses' staff, he was lifted up. Like Moses' staff, he was lifted up, and there's the opportunity to cross, to leave, to separate from the evil. And like Joshua, the separation from the evil is the promised land. But what Paul says here in Romans is, therefore we have been buried with him through baptism into death, so that as Christ was raised from the dead through the glory of the Father, so we too may walk in newness of life. Does it say here that if we don't be baptized, buried with him through baptism, that we can't be raised as Christ was raised? Therefore we have been buried with him through baptism into death, so that as Christ was raised from the dead through the glory of the Father, so we too might walk in newness of life. Does that mean if we're not baptized into death that we can't walk in newness of life? There's water in the plan. There has been from the very beginning. But if it's in the plan, that means it's a product of the end result. For if we have become united with him in the likeness of his death, certainly we shall also be in the likeness of his resurrection. But if we dismiss the baptism, if we're not buried with him through baptism, then are we not united with him in likeness of death? Certainly we shall also be like, and if we're not united with him in likeness of death, are we not united with him in the likeness of his resurrection? And if that's the case, then our old self may not be crucified if we understand it that way. In order that our body of sin might be done away with, so that we no longer be slaves of sin, brothers and sisters, I tell you, it's not might, but it is. I studied and I studied and I studied, and I got all tore up that there are men and women that have denounced baptism being necessary. We have energetic evangelists describing that baptism is nothing more than a showing to the public that we are faithful and that we can be saved before we are baptized. But Romans chapter 6 doesn't read that. Romans chapter 6 says that baptism is in the likeness of death, so that we can be in the likeness of his resurrection, united with him. There needs to be some understanding that if we dismiss the baptism to be the likeness of his death and necessary, then we also dismiss that we can be in his likeness and his resurrection. Frank read, if one is not born of spirit, of the water and of spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of God. Water Water's in the plan. We have the opportunity today. The waters are available. We have the opportunity today to make that happen. Baptism, the immersion, forgiveness of sin, just like the days of Noah, the waters will separate us from the evil. Just like Joshua, the waters can lead us to the promised land. But Paul let us know in Romans, the book of Romans, that baptism is the resemblance of his death, so we can resemble his resurrection and be with him one day in heaven. If that's understood, then come as we stand and as we sing.